I've said this before. I've met a Soviet defector years ago who told me that, the funny thing was that at least in the Soviet Union, they were honest about the fact that the government was watching and controlling you and upfront about it, and you knew it. And if you didn't follow along, you were going to go to Siberia. Here in the United States, we play a little slap and tickle with it. Socialism becomes this dictatorial rule. Marx wrote that into his dictate. He's got a new book out, The Socialist Temptation. Iain Murray is back on the program with us. Iain, welcome back to the show. It's been too long. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine, Joe. Working from home just like everybody else during this this coronavirus.
Well, as a writer, I guess that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Unless you're Marx, and then you want to sit in a coffee shop and watch other people go to work and think how terrible it is that they have jobs and you don't. You use the word temptation, and that's what really jumped off your title to me, because that's really what it is. It plays on our best inclinations to want to help out somebody in need, and then it also preys on 5 or 6 of our 7 deadliest vices, too, doesn't it?
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, Joe, the reason I wrote The Socialist Temptation was because I was astonished that this poisonous ideology that seemed to be dead and buried 20 years ago had come back again. And I wanted to know why. And when I looked into it, I realized that socialism actually talks a very good game. It appeals to some, the fundamental American values, values like fairness, like freedom, like community. And so people who know that there's something wrong with America are looking about for answers, and socialism provides these really easy answers to things. The trouble is that when you get down to it, as I detailed in The Socialist Temptation, socialism actually just undermines all 3 of those values.
Right, it perverts the words, uses the slogans. I love the cover of the book, has a mousetrap ready to snap on an unwitting cheese seeker there, but that is the rhetoric that we watched happen in the Soviet Union, and I've talked to folks who said, that first few years in the Soviet Union was sort of almost like San Francisco in the Haight-Ashbury district until things started to run out, almost predictably like was written about in Animal Farm, which I think every kid should be required to read at some point because they'd see it. But that's what started to happen. And then by the end of World War II, Stalin's got concentration camps and re-education camps. But Marx himself writes in there that necessarily people will have to be killed if they don't go along with the program.
Well, indeed. I mean, that's the reality of socialism when it's been implemented to the full extent that Marx desired. Of course, if you talk to a self-proclaimed socialist today, they'll say, no, we don't want any of that. We just want to ensure that there is democratic control over corporations and to make sure that people can't hurt each other when they're speaking and things like this. It's all about democracy. It sounds really good, but one of the things that I do in The Socialist Temptation is I try to tease out what that democratic control actually means, and in the end, it's going to end up somewhere like what happened in the Soviet Union. As the British journalist Toby Young says, socialism always starts with talk about the international brotherhood of man and ends with people having to eat their own pets.
Well, that's the point that we've tried to make so often, and maybe it is the generation that's grown up without the falling or crumbling Soviet Union to look at as an example. But we see it in Zimbabwe, we see it in Venezuela, we see it in North Korea for what we see of it. But maybe these countries are too small for an American to equate. But then in China, the human rights violations that just are rampant, and we shrug them off as if, that's their internal matter and not really our problem, and they're Muslim anyway, or whatever the excuses we make, Iain, that socialism never actually turns out the way people are promised, because they're promised this utopia that never materializes. But we all get to vote for the problems that we all suffer under.
Well, one of the problems is that whenever you actually point to a functioning, existing socialist country like Venezuela, like Zimbabwe, like, as you point out, China, today's democratic socialists will always turn around and say, no, that isn't real socialism. One of the things I do in the book is I quote from a guy who's a great historian of these things, Christian Niemitz from the Institute of Economic Affairs in London. And he's traced this phenomenon, which is that socialism set up, and everybody agrees it's real socialism, and this time it's going to work, and hurrah, the brotherhood of man is here. And then the wheels start to come off, and people start disappearing in the middle of the night, and they say, "Oh no, this is all the fault of wreckers and saboteurs and foreign agents and the CIA and things like that." And then finally, it ends up with unequivocal death camps like we're seeing in China, and then they turn around and say, no, that isn't real socialism. And this happens time and time again. Every time real socialism is set up, it turns into something which they then claim is not real socialism, and that's one of the things that enables them to try this con job again and again.
We're visiting with Iain Murray, Competitive Enterprise Institute, great analyst, has a new book out, and please pick it up. I don't know if it's the Competitive Enterprise Institute website or if you want them to go to Amazon. Hopefully it makes the New York Times bestseller list. I'm sure it's destined to knock Dr. Kendry off the book. I met him as well as you, and I've had more fun with you. Socialist Temptation is the name of the book. You can tell by Iain's accent that, judging by our films of the 60s and 70s, he must be German or Russian. But as a British man, Iain, we in the United States are often pointed to our royal brothers and sisters and said, well, look, England's socialist, or look, Sweden's socialist, or look, France is socialist. They never point to Greek socialism or Italian socialism, apparently. But debunk a little. Does your book go into debunking that myth that, England and Sweden and all these European countries are socialist and they're just fine?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think there are two separate cases here. When you look at the UK, I grew up in a Britain that was as close as you'll get to the ideal of democratic socialism. With everything was owned by the people. So the government owned everything. So the government ran the railroads, it ran all the utilities. If you needed to get a new phone, you'd have to make an appointment with the post office, who ran the telephone system, and so on. And it was all dull and dreary. And unfortunately, the central contradiction of socialism, which is, if something is owned by the people, and the workers, it will be run actually for the benefit of the workers and not for the people. So what you saw was all these great industries, these innovative industries, the successors of the companies that have produced incredible innovations, they all just collapsed. And eventually it got to the stage where I was having to do my homework by candlelight because the power workers were always on strike. So so Britain turned around and said, no, we've had enough of that. We're rejecting democratic socialism. We will elect Margaret Thatcher, and she'll bring back the free market. And what happened? Britain turned into went from being the sick man of Europe, as it was known in the 70s, to being the boom economy of cool Britannia in the 1990s. Sweden is a slightly different case. Same sort of thing in the 1970s. What they decided to do was they decided to keep the welfare state, a very large welfare state, but deregulate everything else. So school choice, for instance, is universal in Sweden. Sweden has a wonderfully innovative atmosphere for firms and corporations. So IKEA is based there. The Spotify, the only big tech firm outside the United States, is based there. It's really a free market society apart from that welfare state.
And they use that, I guess, one for the other in there. But I guess you mentioned innovation, Iain. I mean, even the greatest innovation of the modern world was a British invention, electricity. James Watt was a royal subject, Scotsman, of course, but I won't let that get in the way of our conversation. But and yet the innovations have gone the way of the wayside because the government is dictating, and we're all voting for the things we're most comfortable with. During the presidential primaries, I think it was Beto O'Rourke, Robert Francis, talked about democratic capitalism. And I warned about it because to me that's, the classic two wolves and a sheep voting, on what to have for lunch, or in this case, what to open as a restaurant for lunch, and it's souvlaki. This is collectivists in sheep's clothing. We have a new group now. It's called the Community Rights Initiative, where the community will have rights rather than just the citizen. And I guess you get either voted in or out. Is this becoming some giant version of Survivor, where we vote people in and off the island based on who we like the best?
Oh, indeed. I think if you look at what they call stakeholder capitalism, the idea that stakeholders should be able to dictate the direction of a firm rather than the investors, the owners, and the management of the corporation. Who you would
think would be the stakeholders in the first place.
Indeed, yes. So you get to the stage where anybody who's even tangentially affected by the corporation's activities will have a voice in the corporation, and that means the corporation loses focus, and in the end, it ends up getting run by the corporate social responsibility people in the corporation rather than the innovators, the engineers, the managers. When you look at what's happening with corporate social responsibility around the country, that's what's led to the takeover of the big corporations by woke capitalism, and the
cancel culture.
They're more interested in insulting their customers and playing to the stakeholders than actually serving the needs of the consumer.
Well, and at the end of it, I guess all of this would be considered acceptable, and I'm going to put that in air quotes, verbal air quotes for a second. Iain Murray is on with us. The Temptation of Socialism is his new book. If it actually provided, good outcomes for the poor, as I said, it plays on this idea that we want to help the poor, we want to, feed the infirm, that kind of thing. But they don't wind up with that either.
Well, no, indeed. I mean, if you look at health systems around the world, everybody knows there's something wrong with American healthcare and that it needs to be fixed. But when people say, well, in that case, we need fully socialized healthcare, look at the healthcare systems around the world that are in the developed world that are fully socialized. Canada, the UK, for instance. Mm-hmm. Those have some of the worst health outcomes in the developed world. Mm-hmm. I go into this in the Socialist Temptation. Look at Europe, which is supposed to be more socialist. there are large segments of European healthcare that are actually privately provided, and nobody bats an eyelid about this. They know it's a better system than the fully socialized medicine. So once again, the socialist temptation is to go for what sounds great, fully socialized medicine, and you end up with worse health outcomes than a hybrid system in which private doctors, private clinics, private insurance all play a very big role.
Iain Murray, it's always a joy to talk to you, and I never have enough time to do so. Some of that's my fault, self-inflicted, but thank you so much for writing the book. It's The Socialist Temptation. It's out now. Get it Amazon, drive it to the top of the New York Times bestseller list until somebody notices, and then they remove it. Or go to, I guess, Competitive Enterprise Institute, or do you keep a direct website that people can get it from?
Yep, there's a direct website which is just called socialisttemptation.com.
Easy to share on your social media. Iain, thank you so much. Great to catch up with you, and God bless.
It's always a pleasure. Great to talk to you again, Joe.